Hey, welcome. For those that don't know me, my name's Teddy Cook, and I'm ACON's Acting Director of Community Health and Wellbeing. It's such an honour to be here today, despite this weather. It's really having a go at us, but welcome, and welcome to all who are streaming in live. It's wonderful to have you. So important that we can have a mix of different ways that people can engage, particularly when the weather wants to do a thing. But ACON's really proud to be able to host things like this. It's really important that we gather together as much as we can, because we know that trans people, when we're connected, it's better for our health and for our wellbeing. So I'm really proud to be here with you all. The Love Project is ACON's incredible Living Older Visibly Engaged program, coordinated by the wonderful Russ, who's been at ACON now forever. Is that about right? I think, yeah, about ever. And thank you for your remarkable work. Thank you to Nico, to Joseph, incredible Joel, our photographer, Liz from Trans Health Equity, Maria, everybody who is Steph. You know, we don't do these things by halves, that's for sure. And so it's wonderful to have so many trans people employed doing amazing stuff. We're gathering here right now, so we're in Gadigal country, and it's essential that we acknowledge that, and I know that Darby will too, who will be hosting this incredible event with this remarkable, incredible bunch of our legends who will be talking to you about their experiences. And I'd really like to hand over to you too. Someone that I've known for over a decade, who we're really that old, and it's wonderful to do this with you.
Thank you, Teddy. A big hello to everybody, siblings and allies out there alike. I would like to start off by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation on the lands on which we stand today. All First Nations elders, past, present and emerging, all First Nations siblings who've been pioneering lots of ways for us to move forward and work and look at all sorts of ways of gender. And I'd like to acknowledge the First Nations people around us today. The Love Project. I believe, Russ, this is the first event of its kind, which is quite amazing. So well done, thank you, well done. We have had elders for a long time, but this is the first time. And I will apologise today for memory loss. It's a part of ageing. If I forget names, it's all part of getting old. We're going to go for about an hour and then have an afternoon tea. During this first part, it would be wonderful. There's some post-it notes and pens, if they all work. If you write down questions, thoughts, statements, things you would like to ask us or have talk about, we'll put them all up on a board in the break, and we will address those in the second part. Now we have this magnificent panel today. We are an incredibly diverse bunch of people. I think one of the things as trans and gender diverse people, not one of us has had the same journey. It might be helpful if we had, but we haven't. But I'm going to hand to Josephine first. People are going to introduce themselves and tell a bit about their lives. And over to you, Josephine.
Yes, well, there's a little bit of blurb on the bit of paper, so I won't go through all of that. My name's Josephine, and I acknowledge to the Gadigal people on whose lands I also live and work as well. I'm currently minister of Pitt Street Uniting Church in the centre of Sydney, and also an Anglican priest. So there's a bit of a journey there as well in that space, and in a very interesting space at the moment in the faith space as we come to terms with change. And I guess that's one of the things I would sort of feel in terms of I've had a lot of change recently, including the deaths of my parents in the UK, changing role, denomination, a whole lot of other, and city. And I think that's sort of a common experience for a lot of, well, for people generally, but for older people, is that things start to fall away or they start to mature. And there are lots of other new questions that come up in the second half or later part of life. Some of which, from my point of view, I suppose you might say, the wisdom traditions of the world ought to be able to contribute to, but probably need to do a lot of listening and repenting about the way in which they've approached gender in recent times, certainly.
Wait a minute, here we go. I'll get my glasses on so I can see what lies I've told about myself. Well, you can read the blurb, really. Basically, yes, I grew up in WA. Well, in Australia, I think being gay or doing anything gay was illegal until the mid-80s, sometimes the mid-90s, depending on what state you were in. So I grew up where in a situation where we had to keep our sexuality secret. If the police raided you and found out you were living with someone of the same sex, you had to sort of prove that you weren't doing anything naughty, or they could charge you, and it was 7 years in prison if you were caught kissing, and 14 years in prison with hard labour, with or without whipping. Oh, yeah, please. I don't know if you got a choice for actual naughty acts. I got involved in the gay community, did drag shows, realised I was transgender, went on hormones in my early 20s, did the genital realignment surgery here in Sydney in about 89. And then I was staying, I think, at what was then Teresia's house, which became the Gender Centre. And that was the first time I'd been in a crowd of other trans people. And forgive me if I might drop the word tranny, which is possibly not so okay now, but if I'm talking about the old days, I might forget and refer to us as how we used to refer to ourselves. I believe very much in claiming words. If you called something and you're at that, you go, well done, well spotted, bleeding obvious. Yes, I am at that. So yes, working on living in Teresia's house, I got involved with the management committee, because back then they drew from the community to help decide what was happening. And that, I guess, made me aware of the issues that trans people faced other than just my own personal issues. And I really wanted to do things to make the options for trans people more broad, because back then the options were you have to fit in the binary. You're either a man trapped in a woman's body or a woman trapped in a man's body. Those are the only two possibilities, other than man and man's body, woman's body. There's no in between, and if you're a bit in between, we can give you help to rush you from one side of the binary to the other, which isn't to not the binary, and most of it just pass our lives, and people think, oh, they don't even think that's a woman, that's a man. They just don't notice your gender when you're going to the shops to buy milk. But it's important to make a space for people that maybe don't pass or who are seen as in between. Because if it's okay to change from one sex to the other, you have to go in the space in between to get there. You don't just magically change. Therefore, the space in between must be okay. Because humans are there, therefore it must be an okay place for humans to be. I'll admit it really crystallized for me when I read the American newsletter Hermaphrodites with Attitude, where obviously God or nature was making humans noticeably intersex, not binary, not discretely male or female. And if nature or God says that's an available option for us, then society must say that's an okay option too. And that's when I began exploring my sex and gender identity beyond what I'd been told, being a man trapped in a woman's body, or a woman trapped in a man's body, I forget which. And I think my email name is Spansexual. Fished around for a while trying to come up with words for being non-binary, which is the term that's eventually being adopted. I'm told that I used it like 30 years ago, but people thought it was just too geeky and wouldn't be accepted. So I don't know for sure whether my memory is a unreliable guide. Right, I'm taking up too much time here. I worked on the Transgender Lobby Coalition with some people that are in the room, but they can out themselves if they want to. Many people worked for the transgender legal reform in the mid-90s. Clover Moore was the first one to put it in front of Parliament. Parliament rose before it could go through, but then the Labor Party moved it, pretty much adopted the same legislation. And so it wasn't perfect. You still had to have surgery, I think, to change your birth certificate. But it was a step in the right direction. And we hope that we move towards a world where your legal identity is what you say it is, because that's the only authority of your identity, what you think it is. Then we had the Human Rights Commission in 2009 did a big report and said, yeah, we should have a third sex option rather than force everyone into this binary. Yet, obviously, most trans people, like most people, will want a binary option, but some people want more options than that. And so all the public servants around Australia gathered together, all the attorney generals of the different states, and they all said, yes, we want to have legal consistency is what they want. Yes, we'll have a third option. So they agreed to do it, and then an activist said to me, well, you go and see if you can actually do it. Get the paperwork together and push it through, because you sort of qualify. So I did that, and then initially they said, yeah, here it is. Your sex is, I think it was not specified to start with. It varied a bit. We started with different terms. Is it non-specified, or is it specified as non-specific? There's a huge difference between the two, apparently. Anyway, they issued the papers. We kept quiet about it for a month because it was Mardi Gras time, and all the news was going to be Mardi Gras. There wasn't going to be any gay, lesbian, trans news that wasn't Mardi Gras. It was going to disappear. So we waited a month. Then we were on the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald to say, look what we did. It's possible for people to be legally identified as other than male or female. Those aren't the only two options. And then the government freaked out, and the Solicitor General contacted the registrar and said, this document can't have been issued. It was a mistake. It's annulled. And then we had to fight them in court for about 4 years, I think, before the High Court of Australia finally said, your sex doesn't have to be binary, and your sex, they pointed at me, is, I think it's non-specific now. Obviously, a little bit before we'd come up with we got non-binary legally registered. All right, I've ratted on long enough. You can read more about it there and ask me lots of questions. Next, sorry.
Okay. So I'm Karen, and my journey is, I guess my journey's been more one of conformity and hiding, fearing rejection, and wanting to make sure that everybody else was happy. For me, what that meant was to fulfill all of the social expectations of all those closest to you, and do all the normal things that makes everybody else happy, and think that you're actually fulfilling your role in society. So for me that meant roles that took on identities. So many times I looked and found that the roles I took on professionally and voluntarily had uniforms, and I became the uniform. So for me, that was then something that I questioned many times, was, so you're pretending to be something everybody else can identify with, but you're not being true to yourself. And not being true to yourself meant, well, you don't want to be rejected. Well, ultimately, as many of us know, that's what happens. But I can tell you, and this is the best part, that isn't necessarily permanent. That rejection is a reaction, because people don't understand what you've been going through. People don't understand where your journey began and where you are now at in that journey. So for me, I didn't get involved in openly supportive and activist roles. I was just really in survival mode, and doing all the things that were expected, and trying to be the best parent I could be for children. Then, when that decision finally came and everything crashed and burned, I still had one person there, my sister, my only sibling. And if it weren't for her, life would have been very different. And as a result of that, over this period of time, my journey began in 2007. Over this period of time, having lived my life worrying myself sick about what other people might think if I wore something too brightly coloured. In fact, the reactions I remember, I love purple. And I had this amazing electric purple shirt, that microfiber shirt that I love to wear. And I remember one of the young blokes I knew said, "Wow, you look really colourful, are you gay?" Really? Because I'm wearing purple? And that was the thing that I was trying to avoid. So now I'm at that place where, as I've said before, if you don't like me, that's your problem. I'm me, finally. The liberation of finally realising that, then working in the mental health industry in Adelaide, where I grew up and was there until just 5 years ago, working in a project where I was in a peer support role for trans and gender diverse people, as well as others of the LGBT community. I finally got to that place where it was like, okay, I'm finally me. I'm finally me. And then along came my partner, who I'm now married to, and neither of us were looking for that, but all I can say is by being true to yourself, by being authentic, the world finally makes sense. Finally, you arrive. And as I said to people many, many times, you've only got one life. It's yours to live. Don't live it for everybody else. I think that's enough.
So hi everyone. Before I get started, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past and present, but I'd also like to acknowledge all of our trans community who are here today. I guess my story, I am originally, as you can tell by the blurb, from New Zealand. Came over here in 1986, and when I left New Zealand, I left as my mother and father's son. So coming here to Australia that wasn't my intention, was to come here and transition and become the woman I am today, but it just went that way. I also on getting here and coming to Australia, I hit King's Cross and hit everything else. So I went straight into the sex industry because I had found myself without money. So I came over here with a little bit of money to support myself. But back in New Zealand, everything shuts at 11 o'clock and they ring the bells and you go to kicked out. But over here in King's Cross, everything was bright lights, like 24 hours. And I got caught up in that nightlife, and of course I come from a country town back home in New Zealand, and geez, this is just something totally different. The people, everything. I mean, I started to realize that living in the Cross at that time, you could be whoever you wanted to be, you know, as long as you didn't give a shit about anyone else. So, and that was me. Yeah, I got into the sex industry very early, and along came everything else, the drug use as well. I don't recommend it for anyone who's here that wants to come into the sex industry or transition or do drugs. Just do one at a time, because it's hard work trying to, you know, it was quite bloody exhausting to be exact. And I kind of then started my journey. I was around a lot of other trans women that were working on the streets, and they were who coached me into the industry. And I remember telling the girls, because we used to hang out at a bar called the Bottoms Up Bar at the Rex Hotel in King's Cross, and those who are, you know, mature enough to know that will know where that bar was. And so we, you know, when I explained to the girls that, you know, I've fallen on hard times, I spent all my money, I'm about to get kicked out, and they said to me, "Oh, girl, you're going to have to get frocked up and come down and sell your whole." And I thought, oh no, I could never do that, you know. But, you know, I obviously proved to myself I could because I was in the industry for over 30 years. So yeah, that was my introduction. And I think that early transition back in those days, because it was hard to get on hormones, and so I was reliant on my sisters around me, and whenever we saw each other, it would be open up, you know, and that kind of like you couldn't tell whether you were having a hormone or a bloody drug, to be exact, you know. But you know, that was my introduction to my transition. I did later on start seeing an endocrinologist, lovely guy, he's now gone now, Professor Steinbeck, and he helped me through that and to manage that. And I'd always turn up and he'd say, I remember him saying to me, so, sit down, Chantal, and tell me what hormones you're currently on. And I started rattling them all off. And I got to about maybe 4, and he went, oh, stop. And I went, why, I've got more. And he goes, no, if you've got more, I'm amazed that you're actually here today sitting in front of me, because, you know, I didn't know that there was damages to you could do damages to your body with taking so many. We got the list done. There were about 12 that I was taking, because I think when at such a young age and wanting to sort of like become who I, you know, am today, there was this huge rush, and I wanted to be a woman straight away. I wanted it to happen like within 6 months. So I thought by taking tons and tons of hormones that would happen, but it didn't. And I'm so glad that endocrinologist will say, we're just going to reel it back, okay? We're going to put you on one hormone and see how that goes. So yeah, that, and also too, because of that, trying to access hormones as well, there really weren't that many doctors that would prescribe them. So in the cross, yes, but if you stepped out of that and decided, oh, I want to move out of the cross and say maybe move to the Central Coast, which I did, the doctors up there wouldn't write me out a script, and I'd have to travel all the way back. So there was a lot of traveling done in the early days of trying to get on hormone therapy and anything else, actually. But then decided, yeah, you know, I want something different, and then decided to step out of that, because being in the industry so long and at such an early a stage for me, I built up a security, you know, with all my other sisters, you know. We all became really, really close. We were so like family. Like, we would fight with each other. We would cry with each other. We would stand by each other, right? It was so much that was going on that when I took myself out of that and moved up to the Central Coast, it was really isolating, and I found I wasn't around my sisters anymore, you know. And believe it or not, I didn't think so at the time, but them testing me, you know, and saying, girl, that's not women, women don't do that, you know, you've got to close your legs, you know. All of that stuff, I missed all of that stuff and being around my sisters, you know. But moving up to the Central Coast and living there on my own was a different journey. I then decided to get a normal job and try that out. And I remember I'd been on the benefit for quite some time, and they had a project back in the day. It was called the DEET program, and it was for long-term unemployed. And I remember arcing up and saying, I'm not going to this bloody thing. But to get the dole and continue to get the benefit, you had to. So I went along. And I went along to their pictorial. It was down here in Sydney. I'd moved back by then, and it was run by the State Library. And I remember going for the pictorial. There were 30 of us, you know, and then we all went for interviews, and the State Library interviewed us, and I went in there. I was determined to fuck it up, you know. So I went into the interview, and there were 3 sitting on the panel. I'd never ever been faced with that ever before. I'm thinking, oh my God, what happened to one person asking me questions? Now there's 3 of you, and you all got bloody pads, and they're writing things down. And they were saying, oh, so Chantal, what did you think of the pictorial? And I said, oh, it was shit, you know? And then, oh, right, okay, and then they'd write it down, and then the next person would go, so what do you think, Chantal, you could bring to the State Library? And I said, nothing, not a fucking thing, you know? So as you could see, I was determined to fuck that up right from the beginning. But I didn't realise that I was working myself into being the prime candidate to be on this bloody program. And I went home and I thought to myself, well, I fucked that up, so I won't hear from them. A month later, a fucking letter turned up. Congratulations, you have been selected. And I thought, fucking hell. So, I mean, in my head, partly I wanted to move out of the sex industry and get something, but I just didn't have the experience. And I didn't feel I had the knowledge to do other jobs. And so I went to the State Library, and I remember we had an induction day, and the whole 30 of us were sitting around in a huge giant circle, and we had to stand up and identify ourselves and tell a little bit about ourselves, and if you're in a relationship or if you have dogs or cats or whatever, and then you had to finish with a word like something strong, like tenacity. I feel, I'm strong. So it got to me, about 15 people had gone already, and it got to me, and I thought, oh God. So I stood up. I went, my name's Chantal Martin. I live in Gladesville. I've got 2 dogs. I'm transgender. If you don't fucking like it, there's the door. And you know something? I sat down and I thought, hopefully that's fucked it up, right? But guess what? It did not. It did not. I started there, and for me, that journey going in a different direction as who I am was an experience and a half. I started to learn how to communicate better, because you communicate differently if you're a street-based trans worker, okay? You're down there to work, get money, whatever, to support whatever's going on for you, and you operate and communicate in a different way. Whereas when you're going for a job, it's all different, So 6 months of that, and I thought to myself, wow, you know what you've just done, Chantal? Instead of, because prior to that, all the other jobs that I ever did, I actually did it in an unspring way. I never ever told anyone I was trans because I was fearful of not getting the job. So I always hid it. But that got to the point where I was constantly looking over my shoulder and wondering, if I go to if a client walks through the door, I'm going to get sprung. They're going to know me, or somebody's going to see me. And I lived in that fear, not being out and who I was. But at the State Library, I realized that, you know what? You've just walked through the front door, and you'll never ever come through the back door again when it comes to employment. So I guess that's part of my journey, and I'm sure going to share the rest of it with you guys, so I'm going to shut up.
Thank you, Chantal, and everybody. And there's lots of really interesting things that everybody said, and hopefully we'll get back to them, especially about language and identity, work, mental health, family. I believe I have to introduce myself for a little bit. I forgot to as well. So it's my 11th year anniversary this year. My gender story started, I was born in the 60s, which we all thought was a great time. That was going to be progressive, but it wasn't for our peoples as yet, and we was too young to know. I had a Catholic and Jewish parents who brought with them all the oppressions of those organised religions. And I can remember at a very young, early age, I had 3 older brothers going, I'm one of those too, and that was pretty much pushed out of you for the next 10 or so years. I came out as gay once, and then I've come out as trans, and I can say the second coming out was so much harder for me. It was a really difficult coming out. Around that coming out, there was a lot of fear, rightly so based fear in my head about rejection, and that was rejection from my peers that I had built up in community, gay and lesbian. And that's something we still struggle with, unfortunately, but it is something when we're coming out, for all of us, that we go through a big amount of loss. Would I be all right with that? Loss. I can remember the first time when I was young, my father had pubs, and he used to get quite a lot of reviews and all sorts of interesting performers at the pubs. And I can remember sitting there, and I was in about year 9, and these trans ladies, trannies as they called themselves in the time, came out, and I was besotted. And I knew that was me, but it wasn't me. I couldn't work it out. I went backstage, and this lovely old dancer performer, she gave me her nipple covers. And I kept those nipple covers And I kept on to these little purple sequin things all my life, and I pulled those nipple covers out the day I decided to transition, and I blessed and thanked her, because I held on to those, so I was very, very thankful. In my working life, I've had a huge variety, and I think I came from, my mother was very creative, and I couldn't follow her path, but performing was a real place for me to play out stuff going on in my head. I could be the boy, I could be the man, I could be whatever I liked, and I could create all sorts of things around that. However, when I then went into that industry, it wasn't like that at all. It was a very binary industry in this country in its day, and it was very heteronormative, and girls were all blonde-haired and thin, and boys were all hypermasculine. It's very difficult in casting, and we all know it still is. We have people playing trans roles when they shouldn't be playing our roles. I recently spoke to Netflix, and they're like, Netflix Australia, what do we do? What do we do? Like, it's the same you should have been doing for women, for First Nations people. It's called representation, and you don't need me to tell you that now. I mean, we're at a point of time where these big companies, they know what they have to do. You have to get us employed everywhere, on every level, and then things start to change. And that's the same with language. When we had this tiny bit of language, then the more people talked, and I was asking Nori May about the first time they heard the word non-binary or gender non-conforming or any of those things, because I remember the first time I heard that, and it blew my head away. And I go into schools, and I train now, and I train in corporate and schools, and this is one of the big things getting through, is the lie about the binary, and I think this is a really exciting time. I think also as we get older, one of the things that happens for older people, we carry stuff from our generations. So I think it's really interesting for, you know, people growing up when things were criminalised and people are arrested, and what sort of fear that brings around, you know, the police, and for good reason, sex workers, drug users, the overlaps and the intersectionality for our community, and how we carry those. We can't help carry those isms with us. And the stuff about language is really interesting, because our communities police a lot of language, and I hear, you know, I've heard older women, trans women, being cut down for using the word tranny, and I'm like, the more language we've got, people, the better it is actually, and I hope that's where we move forward, that we all get this great language. We're at this exciting time, and I think young, gender diverse and trans people are really pushing that, and it's so, so exciting to see. And I hope we never go back to a time where there's two words to describe gender. I worked on Safe Schools, which is one of the most rewarding and proud jobs I could ever have had in my life, despite the 13,000 articles that were in the press to dehumanise us, to demoralise us, and to use us as political weapons, which is what I think, you know, is happening for a lot of those young people. But it was an amazing job. I worked at the AIDS Council when it was the AIDS Council. I worked for NUA, and I've been really blessed to work where I have overlapped with the trans and gender diverse communities all my life. So I feel very privileged to be here today, and I'm very happy to see all these faces. And I want to say hi to AJ, who couldn't be with us today. I hope you're watching, AJ, and not slacking out on it. And I'd like to say hello to everybody else who's online Zooming. Is it Zoom we're doing? Zooming, the modern day COVID answer, but I do. In regional, all our people who are isolated, and I think that's a really big thing. I think still, you know, accessing, one of the things I'm concerned about as we get older is how we access what we need to be ourselves. And then we've got aged care. On that, I'm going to leave it about me, and I'm going to throw it to here, to the panel, whoever wants to say something about what sort of outcomes would we like to see as we're getting older? What sort of resources or outcomes do you think we might need as a community or as communities? Go, Nori.
Oh, wrong way. 2. Oh, there we go. So I just want to derail you for a minute to thank you for working on the Safe Schools project, and because, well, as we get old, I suppose, we think more and more about what the kids are doing. We care more, I guess, about the grandchildren generation. So I just want to give you a big thank you for working on the Safe School project, and makes a difference and gives those oldies hope for the future. So.
I think actually, thank you to everybody, because we've all done our we'd all still do work and we won't stop working, because when we enter a service that has never seen a trans person still, doesn't know what gender diversity, even when we're 98, we're expected to be educators, you know. And I know everybody up here is passionate about education. Sometimes it's tiring. Isn't it? Yeah, it is. But let's just open it up. What are some of the things we're thinking about as we're getting old, besides our memory going? But, yeah.
True. Speaking of services that you need as you get older, when you pass 50, they send you a box, and the government wants a bit of your poo. I avoided doing it for a few years. Finally, I did it, and they went, "Okay, you've got you go and do that. Come and do some tests." So you go without food. It's a huge procedure. Then they did the test, and as I was coming to one time, they said, "You've got cancer." And I just thought, thank God they've given me drugs. It was a bit soft in focus at the time. The good news is they were able to cut it out. But when I went to see the surgeon, I had to explain my anatomy. Like, if you come across a prostate gland, leave that there. That's supposed to be there. It was good that I was able to be honest about my transgenderedness and my particular anatomy, because this is what the doctor has to work with. It's usually not anyone's business what you're sitting on, but when you go to the doctors and they're getting into your holes and pulling bits out of you, it is their business, so it did become important. And I like to think that maybe he selected me as one of his patients. He's one of the top surgeons in Sydney, so I really got looked after for free, Medicare, thank you very much. I like to think maybe he selected me because a transgender patient's a little bit unusual, and doctors always like to do something that's a bit unusual, something they hadn't seen before, so I worked that to get the treatment I needed.
Good advice. And what about accessing services? And I also, I mean, none of us here are regional now, but I do think the point of when you're talking, Chantel, about going to the Central Coast, now I know young people can't access, you know, hormones, medications now. A doctor's like, what's this? What's it going to be like for older people who perhaps want to move out of Sydney? As Sydney gets, cost of living is hard, public housing is hard. There's reports now that it's easier for us to get work, but harder for us to sustain work, and getting work as ageing communities. So anyone want to comment on anything like that?
Well, I used to work in Toowoomba, which is an interesting city because it's not as conservative as some people think. It's a very strong fundamentalist choir, as I call it there, and people like Lyle Shelton are associated with it. But I think very much there people struggle, and services I had to access in transition from Brisbane because Toowoomba just wasn't in that space, despite the fact it's quite a significant service city for northern New South Wales and quite a lot of Western Queensland. So there's significant issues, I think, in those spaces. And that links a little bit, I think, from my sort of area of work with the faith communities. The amount of, we've heard a lot about schools recently about religious discrimination and such like, but there are significant issues also in the aged care area and in other services that are linked, counselling and such like, that are served by a range of different faith organisations. And I don't want to trigger anybody, but I was quite struck the other day to hear a story of someone who'd gone to the Netherlands, I think, to access assisted dying, which on the terms that Alex Greenwich has been proposing I also support, but they'd gone to do that partly because they couldn't face, as they grow in their 70s, going into aged care facilities, particularly in their area, which were particularly faith-based ones, and they were worried about that. Now, my view is that is an excessive, not for that person, that may be quite right for them, but there are spaces, I think the Jewish services, I think most uniting services, and anyone who has problems, let me know, because I'm in touch with some of them, and parts of the Anglican community, and probably some Catholic spaces as well, which aren't really heard. But there's a terrific amount of work that needs to be done in those agencies. And I think it comes back a little bit also for my generation, because I grew up back in England, similarly to Norrie, where certain acts were prescribed and you go to prison as such like, and also I was very involved in struggles for women, but that second wave feminism, which we're still sort of the framework, which was a very binary construction, I think is still in my generation. So we still have quite a lot, trans women particularly, but also trans men, particularly when it comes to birthing and things. There is those problems. And in the general population, we were brought up, and I was brought up in a little rural area, where we just didn't have the language and there just wasn't any visibility of people. So if you've grown up in that generation and you haven't been part of the queer community or had much connection, I think that still happens. So I've met quite a few people, including quite a few lesbians as well, who've gone into aged care and have found that they've had to go back into the closet. And it's really quite distressing. Not necessarily just to do with the staff, but the other people around there. And we live increasingly, one of the things I've found quite, why I'm in a church sometimes, is because in the church space we do, and sometimes it's limited, but we do have people of all sorts of different backgrounds and interests, and it keeps you a little bit humble, but also it means that you see a greater diversity than if you live in your own community. And one of the things that worries me about some of the aged communities is that they can be very monochrome because they haven't got other people, including sometimes even kids, grandchildren can't stay overnight, things like that. But also they're often very straight, I think, and very coupley as well, until you lose your partner, and then you've got another set of problems. And if you don't like playing bingo on a Thursday night, and you don't like church, which is quite reasonable, then where'd you go?
And I think, in this country, and we don't know about others, but we've seen a Royal Commission into aged care services that doesn't really include LGBTIQ at all. And interestingly, in The Guardian today, and Chantal, it's about drug taking. I want to ask you, because they said today in The Guardian, which is shocking, 10% of people in aged care facilities in Australia are medicated to sedate them. Now, really interesting, when we come full circle, we may have been medicating as young people or older people ourselves, but to have somebody forcibly medicate you, that really does frighten me. And particularly people with big personalities, and people don't like older people with big personalities and big mouths, or big trans people or big gender diverse people. And it's a real worry how, because to me it really simulates prison. Aged care. It's really very close to an institution that you don't really want to be in, And Josephine, can I just ask, are people really welcome in your church, whether they're faith-based or not? Like, are people needing a safe space just to come and sit?
Yes, very much so. And there is a growing number. Sydney is a particularly difficult religious space. It's the most conservative big city in the country. But there are a number of them, and there are quite a few. The Metropolitan Community Church was a leader, the Quakers, several Uniting Churches, South Sydney, Leichhardt, Paddington, and ourselves. But Pitt Street has had a long history of queer leadership. However, it's quite interesting. I had, the Sunday before Trans Day of Visibility, I interviewed a young non-binary person as part of the service. And it was quite fascinating. A lot of people who, even though they're 100% behind the rainbow community, had not actually thought about gender diversity really very much beyond, and they're very supportive to me, but there's a journey to be made, and I'd say the Uniting Church has still got a way to go. I think, they've appointed me as first trans minister, outwardly so, but there's more work to be done, and sometimes there's you can rest on your laurels thinking you're there and you're not yet. So, but we're pretty strong in Pitt Street.
I actually go to a Uniting Church too. When I started going, there was about 6 people there, but one of them was Dorothy McRae McMahon, who came out as a lesbian, one of the first church authority official peoples to come out as lesbian, and got accepted by the Uniting Church through that process. So I'm happy to say that I'm a member of the South Sydney Uniting Church, and I'm just one of many weirdos they have there. I'm not the only trans person there by a long shot. Yeah, and it's nice to feel part of a welcoming community that understands things like John 1:16, which is the whosoever believes, not just the good men and the good women, but whosoever belongs.
Darby, I
I
just wanted
think,
to,
oh, sorry,
wanted
Chantel.
to say something about the regional areas. I just recently come back from regional outreach with SWAP, and look, the lovely work that ACON does in the regional areas is amazing. And we were invited, SWAP was invited to share centre stage with ACON in Tamworth for Transgender Day of Visibility. And the way that ACON works in regional areas is absolutely amazing, pulling all the service providers together. I mean, there were so many service providers there that had not an inkling about what trans was or even youth. But what I noticed was there were a lot of us mature age trans people that attended, so many. And they came from the different areas around Tamworth as well. So that was a really great function to be at, but also to the way that it's done. And I believe ACON does that all over New South Wales in different regional areas. So it's really good that we have services like ACON who pull everyone together. I mean, like, we would have just gone up there and done outreach to, you know, to workers, sex workers and other service providers. But being invited to that event, we got to speak. It was like a double layer. We got to meet them and we got to speak to them about what we do, but also to give them a little bit more education around being an older trans person and what to say, what to do. And as we mentioned earlier, that pronouns are really, really, really important. And I've got to tell you a horrible, shocking story about Chantel. When I first started at SWAP 12 years ago, I thought, oh, for fuck's sake, now we've got another name. And the names just kept on coming out, and I just thought, I just don't get it, you know. And I'm so grateful to be at SWAP because SWAP has shown me, okay, that, because I'm from a different time, okay. I'm from back in the 80s, and when I came out, like when I transitioned with a lot of older transsexual women, okay. So there was no trans, no, you know, all of that, or tranny, or you were tranny. So that was it for us. And then maybe 10 years later, the word transgender came out, right? And we're thinking, oh Lord, here we go. And then another 10 years, we've got trans. And now we've got all of these other pronouns, you know, that we're using, and kind of like, I get it now because I'm in a community, I work for, you know, in the community. They struggle with the whole change of name. And of course it comes with aging as well. You know, I don't want to blooming change. I want to just stay exactly how I am. But for Chantel, I've had to learn and see how effective it is to be inclusive, okay? To know these names and not be afraid of them, right? And go, oh no, you know, I don't think I could actually get into calling people that. But it's important that we do that. And while we were away on regional outreach, that's exactly what I was doing with some of these service providers, was educating them on pronouns are really, really important. And then I just had to spin that around and remind myself, what was it like for you when you first came out, and how did service providers treat you? You know, they addressed me as he because of my ID, because, you know, my ID would be in a male, you know, form, and then they'd go, oh, okay, so he's sitting over there. I was still called Chantel, by the way. I don't know how they managed to get that fucked up, but anyway. But it really is. And so those regional areas are now a little bit more educated on trans issues and concerns. They also too have invited a whole lot of us back to do it again. You know, they've got Trans Pride coming up in October. You know, so yeah.
And I think one of the things for our siblings out in regional areas is that it's that whole thing when it takes. My mother used to say, Australia's 30 years behind the rest of the world, when regional Australia's another 30 years behind that. And it's a laughable thing, but it's not when we consider. I mean, I know Tamworth well, and I know it's a very harsh. Where's Teddy? I'm curious how it all goes, because the first time I did training in Tamworth at a school that had gender diverse and trans kids, but they were really struggling. One of the teachers in training, and I was so shocked, and thankfully my ally colleagues, actually picked up for me, and it's really important that I actually say that when we're working with people and our allies, that they do keep an eye out to see if we're taking on everything, and that, pick up for us, because we'd rather not be doing it, I think, into some way. But I had a teacher go, "Oh, we should take them out and do what they do with potty calves." And I didn't understand what he was talking about. And he said, "Go out and shoot them." So that is still in quite a modern context. This is what we go through, and that impacts all generations and for all of us. And a wonderful work people are doing regional, but Chantel and ACON will know that for our siblings out there, to get to a doctor can be, a 700-kilometre journey. They get a doctor, the doctor goes, "I'm not seeing you, I'm not doing this." So we've got a long way to go there. We've got that in the city. I mean, we're still medicalised to beyond belief. We're still pathologised. We're still legalised. So tranny, trans, all terms that are medical anyway, but it is really, really interesting. And how we are when we use services. I mean, I'm interested to hear how people have been treated medically or how we think we'll go accessing aged care services without discrimination. Any thoughts?
I think with the aged care one, I think that we still need to do a lot of work around aged care. I mean, I've had so many of our sisters say, "I ain't going into an aged care service because we get treated differently." And then, of course, it makes a huge difference as well, because it's about our body, and it makes a huge difference if you're post-op or pre-op, and it really, it's a huge difference. I know a lot of my sisters, they just will not go in there because of the way that they'll be treated, and a lot of them have been treated badly, because of that. Or do you have the operation? And ask those questions. It doesn't matter. I'm here and, I just need to be, helped and stuff like that. But it doesn't happen like that, because people still need to be educated in the aged care system about the body. Maybe we should focus on training them about people's bodies, maybe? Do you think we have to do that?
Do everything. And one of the things that intrigues me too is about research into our ageing bodies and those of us on hormones. And I'm constantly saying to the doctor, "Is this level going to change at any time, or you just keep whacking me with this for the rest of my life?" And they're like, "There's no answer." We're all guinea pigs as well, which, as we start to feel things going in our body, you start worrying about the effects of that on certain things in your body. Is that something anybody else, or is it just me in my head?
Absolutely. I'm just waiting. Here we go. I had some problems with mobility a few months ago, joints swelling up, etc. And I started looking on Google to see what was causing it. And apparently, it was either caused for men, their testosterone goes down, so there's inflammation, and women something else happens with hormones, so they get inflammation. I'm thinking, well, how has that happened for me? I don't take any hormones, and I don't have any gonads, because I figure, well, eunuchs have lived long, healthy lives for centuries. So I'm a bit of a medical experiment, but I figure I should really be tracking down doctors and say, well, how is aging affecting me? What do I need to know? Do I need to consider anything so that my mobility isn't compromised? I don't have inflammations affecting my joints and stuff. So I guess I need to do some research, and my first thought is maybe going into Kirkton Road Centre, because they see a lot of trans patients. You don't want to be the only trans patient your doctor sees. I want to see a doctor that's had seen lots of trans patients who have done many different options, on hormones, off hormones, had surgery, not surgery, so I get a broader view of what the possibilities are. But when you go to the doctor when you're aging, you're not a cookie cutter product. We're all individuals, but trans people a little bit even more so.
You don't want to be going in and explaining it 101 from beginning as we're getting older. And I will say for this time, particularly for people who are watching who may be in regional, who don't know about Trans Hub, there is a good list of doctors, current doctors on that website, and familiarise yourself. If you're in regional New South Wales and you don't know about Trans Hub, go and have a look there. It is a great resource. Yes.
The old people can't hear you, Mum.
Yeah, up here, Cardi.
The aging ears.
Please excuse me interrupting, but as an 82-year-old who only transitioned a year ago after 70 years of hiding, there's a lot of subjects being discussed. However, I live in Bowral. I feel very, very isolated. I don't know of any other transgender person in the Bowral area who's my approximate age. I would love to go for a cup of coffee with people and so on. So I'm just slightly concerned that there's a degree of complacency, and that's being a harsh judgment, I accept, because of the good work many of you are doing. It does, and I'm not sure there's an easy answer, because obviously there's not unlimited money and so on. But I wouldn't like to think that the people who are like myself, very isolated, are forgotten. It's hell, in a way, and I've also actually, I'm sorry, I shouldn't be going on, but I've actually recently been diagnosed with early dementia. So I find it very hard to accept I hid for so long, and now when I'm open, I can't really do much because I haven't got much capability left. But I am concerned about the isolated area. For instance, if you look at getting implants, if you live out of the major places, it's extremely hard. You look at the hub and you try and find who does implants. You'll find them all around Wollongong and places like that. You won't find any where I live and so on. We always have to travel long distances. I know I'm going off tack and I'll stop now rather than keeping going, but I just couldn't resist saying. I am known for talking a lot, so sorry.
What is your name?
I'm Donna.
Donna?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much. And my heart hurts from hearing that, and I think you've brought up two things. One is transitioning at an older age, and the other is this constant pang of isolation and loneliness. And it is an urgent thing. And I think back into the days of HIV and AIDS, and the social stigma and isolation for people living with that at the time, and loneliness resulted in the wonderful Luncheon Club. And I always think of the Luncheon Club as this thing up here, almost like the Quilt Project, because they're very, very effective things. And I wonder if there's something, we can looking at and putting into regions. And I know that's not going to help you in the short term or anything like that, but we must talk afterwards this and share contacts and details, because no one here wants that for you. And well done on coming out in your 80s. Go, sister. Absolutely. Anyone else want to thank you, because it really does go on, and I think isolation is something that is with us always in one way as well, and then we have the ageing and isolation on top of that as well. Sitting in lonely homes, not having family, not having meals, not having finance, the financial insecurity that a lot of us faces. We hang on in life, hanging on. You may be lucky to have public housing, you may be lucky to own housing, but I think in this crazy, I don't know about the others, and I was always very impressed to hear Karen as well, very impressed, and I'm going to take something from that about, fuck it, I'm not going to let that happen to me anymore, those fears. And sometimes I feel I get more anxious with age, which is quite bizarre, because I was always quite a confident person, and with age I feel much more anxious. I'm not sure what that is, but yeah.
I think that's one of the things, though, is authenticity. My experience, anyway, authenticity. Finally, being able to live guilt-free, not lying to anybody about who you are, not lying to yourself about who you are, and finally being free, as painful as that is, which is all about the loss and the grief of transition, of coming out, the losses of those people whom you consider to be the people that should be closest to understanding blood family. You suddenly realise that family is far more than blood. Family are the people that love you, care about you, respect you, and will support you no matter what. And these are people that you wouldn't have met at this level prior to your disclosure of who you are. I think one of the things too that for me has been a really, really important part of my journey is we talk about inclusion, we talk about inclusivity, and we want that inclusivity to come from the rest of society. I think we also have to offer inclusivity to people who don't yet understand our journey. And a little bit, I didn't understand it to begin with, but in my transition in a workplace, a public service, a number of my colleagues would say to me, "You are so generous." I said, "What do you mean I'm generous?" They said, "Well, you're allowing people to express their misunderstandings." And I said, "Well, I've lived with this all my life. They have only known me for 5 minutes comparatively, and how would they understand? Therefore, if I can help them to understand, cut them some slack. You know, be respectful to me. I need to work with you. We need to be professional, but I don't want to be your friend. I don't want to be your girlfriend, you know, but I'm still your colleague and I still have a job to do the same as you do. I may look different to you, but I'm still the same person." Now, that's not your problem as such, but it is your problem because you have to decide how you will accept me. If you don't accept me, that's a challenge for you. But my challenge is I just have to accept me. And that's where I find the education of other people, not formally, but formally as well, but to share with other people. I mean, we do this, I'm sure, but in just general conversation, where a work colleague will suddenly, a work colleague all excited about asking me something about my journey and so on, which I was happy to share, and people said, "Oh, can I ask you a question?" I said, "Sure, you can ask me a question. However, if it's inappropriate, I'll tell you, and we'll move on." But in the excitement, this colleague turned around and said, "Oh, so what was your name before?" And it was simply, all I did was turn around and said, "That's not a question that you ask a trans person. That's actually got a name. It's called dead naming." And all of a sudden, this person, whom I respect, still respect as a friend, backed off and became very, very, very concerned that they'd offended me. And I said, no, why would you know? Unless I tell you, how will you know? But now you know, you can tell other people. And you'll know that that's not a question you ask. But if I'm going to stand my ground and choose, and it is a choice whether or not to be offended, you don't have to be offended. But if it hurts you badly enough, it can hurt, but you don't have to take offence and then strike back. It's about being generous. Helping other people to understand will support you and the rest of the community, because you're one by one, you are educating. One of the lovely experiences I had in this same workplace was a younger female worker came to me after a lunch break I was in an administrative reception role at the time, and she came to me and said, "Oh, I was out in the street, and I was out with one of the other guys, and we were walking down the street, and I saw this person, and they were dressed. Well, I'm not sure. They looked dishevelled, and they looked as though, well, they may have been trying to present like a woman or a man, I'm not sure. But anyway, some other guys, and then she moved on, some guys started to abuse her verbally, or them verbally. And then I just tried to help this woman understand, was this somebody presenting as male or female? I said, well, I think it's female. I said, so possibly a trans woman. Oh, okay. And then we moved on, and it was little step by little step. And then as I was explaining this, she suddenly looked at me and she said, "Are you transgender?" And I said, "Well, yes, I am." Oh, she said, "I thought you were just a lesbian." And I went, "You've suddenly become my best friend. Thank you." Yeah. This is the level of education that we need to be generous about sharing and not assuming that people understand, because we've had to fight through it. So that's, I think, one of the really important things.
We're going to break in a couple of minutes. In fact, we might even take it now. Good move, Norrie. Norrie may well be back or not, but anyway. If anybody wants to put down questions, would be great, statements, anything you want us to have a look at in the next half. We've got lovely afternoon tea, I believe, everywhere. Bathrooms are through the back door. I didn't do that beforehand, but they're that way. And they're all gender neutral. They're just bathrooms. All right, thank you. which are quite interesting. I'll talk to Jesse in a minute. And a big shout out to all our allies and people out in regional. Again, another connection out for the people listening in regions. We have some questions from them as well. And I think Donna's sharing of her story, there you are, certainly highlights, the highlight's not even the right word, but draws attention to the extreme isolation and for people transitioning in later, what do we say, older ages of life. I struggle with the language around that. Thank you. The mature are the words to describe people that aren't young. Old, older, mature. It's a mindset. Wise, yes, absolutely, absolutely, all of those things. And what's the government word for us? Pensioners? We're all here? We're all here. I'd still like to acknowledge that we're standing on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation as we start into the second round. And I also want to highlight something for our First Nations siblings and allies. If it's this hard for us as non-First Nations in this country, it's that much harder for them. So there's a whole another level that I can't even imagine, and I try and be empathetic as to what that would be like, being an aged care service and the only First Nations person who was a trans person, double whammy, and it would be very, very, very difficult. I also want to just acknowledge our siblings that are in lockup in jail. And how, and Chantel, I don't know with your work in SWAP if you have any overlaps with people coming in and out and what sort of support they may need and not, and how there's even less support. But for elderly trans people in the prison system coming out, I can't even imagine how you negotiate that.
Yes, so we do work with the trans community. I remember when I started at SWAP, I wondered, because I came from the street myself, and a lot of the sisters would go in and out of jail, and for them it was like a little bit of a resort, you know, just time to have a break, and you know, but when I started at SWAP, I thought, they didn't have a program for that, and I thought, so what's happening with all my sisters? What's happening to them, you know? So we started up the prison project, which allowed me to go into men's prisons where our sisters are and visit them and offer peer support. So, and I think also too the Gender Centre do the same thing as well. They go into prisons as well. And I think there's a few other services as well that do that, but definitely from what I do when I go in there, I think it's having that peer support is something really, really strong. And when, you know, like I would get in there, and I remember my first visit with one of the sisters, and I was devastated because I had to go through all of the screens and put my finger here and look and get my iris done, and you know, and I was blooming exhausted at the end of that, and drained from all of the doors I had to go through. But interesting enough, when I got to see her, she was just so happy to see another peer there, you know. And of course we were, you know, friends before that, you know, from the street. And so we had a lot to catch up on, but it was definitely an opportunity for me to be able to ask her how she's going with her housing, is there anything set up? So that's pretty much what we do, from housing to whatever they need, because that's the issue with a lot of trans women. When they come out of jail, a lot of them will go back in. Right, and depending on how long you've done in prison, will determine on how quick it takes you to get back in there. There's a different life in jail for our sisters, and it's not all as bad as what it looks like from the outside, okay, because there is a different life in there where, especially if they're very, if they've worked on the outside as sex workers, they will continue to do that inside as well, but for a different thing. It may not be money, it will be something else, you know. And that's the part that amazed me, because I'm thinking, how the hell are you getting paid? She goes, oh, don't worry, doll, you know, I've got a television for a month. And I'm going, oh my God, you know, I'm thinking, really? Oh yeah, okay, yeah, I've got somebody, yeah, oh, you know what? As a sex worker, you're just constantly looking at ways to survive and to get by, you know. And so, and not drawing away from, there are some of our sisters that do go in there that actually do experience the violence and everything that's happening. So that still needs to be worked on, and we are working on that very slowly. It's in the system. So yes.
I'm going to read out some of the questions, and some are for ACON directly, and some are general. So feel free. I'm looking at you, Josephine, because you've been quiet over there. Do you find that the visibility of older trans and gender diverse people is less than the younger generations? I'll put that in. What could be done to improve that? Do you find the visibility of older trans and gender diverse people is less than younger? Now, who? You don't have to put your hand up, but maybe say, is that about in terms of health programs targeting cultural, social? It
was more just a general question.
Yeah.
And as a younger person myself, you know, I do see a lot more when I'm out and about. And I just wonder whether you see the same experiences as I do, because I've learned so much in the last hour, and I just think that might be a missing piece for a lot of our younger generation.
And look, it's funny, I spoke, when we all, not all of us made it, but we met up, and we hadn't all met each other, and it was a really lovely meet-up. And one of the things we talk about with young trans in school, but I feel as I'm getting older, is the unseen. So when you start going out into public places that may be LGBTI, you are unseen, because it is so youth-focused, and it's also maybe sexuality-focused and not gender expression-focused. I've been asked to look at resources many times, and I go, oh, what age groups that are aimed at? And I go, oh, everybody. I go, why is it a 15-year-old with no blem, you know? So I think that's common. That's a common experience. It's not the defining experience, because we as communities can talk and more generally aware about that. But yeah, it is something, because people get funding for one thing. Oh, here's something for trans people, even though we've got 3-year-olds to 103, and those needs are so different and varying. But here's money to do one resource that'll reach you all. And they don't. They target probably, I don't know how that works, but you've got to go for the lowest, the middle ground, I suppose. But I don't know, other people want to comment on about that?
As humans age, the binary becomes less visible. Women grow more hair on their faces, men have less hair in their bodies. So the older you get, the less it's an issue. That said, our society acts as if the only people that count are those that are in their peak reproductive age, 20, or those who are doing their best to look that they're at peak reproductive age. That's not the true case for humanity. We all end up being different ages if we're lucky enough. But on a point of old people learning from young, intergenerational learning, my nibbling rung me up last year and asked me to do a Zoom presentation to their high school class for Pride Week. They are about 15 or 16, I suppose. And so I then got to speak with their entire class about their issues, and I had to remember there my nibbling, because at the moment they're not identifying in binary ways. And, you know, if you've got enough people in your extended family, the moment your brothers and sisters start having kids, there's going to be other queers there. So yes, she's my. They are my nibbling, and I am their pibbling. I have to remember that, because I'm their parents' sibling, because I don't have any specific sex, and they also don't have a specific sex. So I am the pibbling of my nibbling. Yeah, still getting my head around it, but worth it.
Can you explain the
nibbling? Nibbling, it's like niece or nephew, but not gender specific.
Gotcha. Nibbling. Gotcha. Thank
And
you.
pibbling is parent sibling.
Gotcha. No, thank you. See, new language. We love it. Absolutely. Nice. Leading on from that, perhaps how can we make better use of the IT Zoom opportunities that COVID has opened up to offer broader education to rural areas or resistant communities? Someone want to talk about Zoom? How it's being used?
Well, I had a conversation with someone earlier about, not everyone has access, and so there's other issues there. But yeah, I think it's a wonderful thing. It does give people, I ran a thing about a week ago with some folk from across the country, or every state, people of faith, and trans people. And it was interesting, the reaction. People said, I didn't know there were so many trans. I said, well, no, we haven't been made visible. And it's one way in which to connect and build those links if you are separated, or if you're struggling with illness or other things as you get older. I think that's really powerful. So yes, and I was asked recently, I couldn't go up, but to Toowoomba, where they were doing something, the arts faculty in the university there trying to heighten visibility. And because I was able to come in from outside, as it were, from Sydney, you've got that access, and to draw on people from across the world as well. So we get a much richer experience, I think, which is really helpful.
I think sorry. Just a moment, Donna. Just a moment. We'll get you a microphone.
You got a mic up, Donna.
Oh dear. I'm sorry. I've spent quite a bit of time on Zoom sessions with a particular group. And as you get older, it's quite tiring. But also, I think people tire of that particular grouping. And that was just my experience. That, when you're remote, it's not the same as being face-to-face. And so eventually, my experience was you sort of fall apart a bit, or there's not the same interest, and I don't know. And so if that's the case in the example I've had, does it mean that Zoom has, to some extent, got short-term validity? And I'm exaggerating when I say short-term, but I'd far rather face-to-face.
I think, Donna, too, you're right, that online video interaction, if we look at that as something as an interim, however it can be for some people, in my experience anyway, a safe entry where people can disclose but not necessarily completely identify themselves. You've got the option whether or not you want your camera on or not. You can still be part, you can still listen to what others have to share and feel part of that connection until you feel safe, until you feel confident enough to perhaps turn your camera on. And eventually, you don't have to say a word. You can type if you want to enter the chats and that kind of thing. I think it's a useful tool and a safe tool, but I don't think it's the complete answer. As you say, I think face-to-face is so powerful. Unfortunately, in our current society, that can be a bit of a challenge.
Look, Donna, we were having a little conversation before we started about but personally I find social media social isolating, and I think it's a really, particularly for me as I'm getting older, I can't bear the forum, and I feel because I don't partake in it a lot, I miss out on stuff. And I do think live, we are humans, we need touch, smell, taste. That's why they isolate us when they're trying to punish us, because that's what they want to do. And that, goes on looking towards, and maybe we try and work towards things like that. And I think Jesse's brought up stuff, something raised about our future direction, policies and priorities, and we do have a lot. And Jess, do you mind talking about that first report in 97? I think it's sort of interesting.
Yeah, okay. Sorry.
I'm putting you on the spot, but I think the facts haven't changed in how many years?
Well, look, I'm Jesse Hooley. I'm one of the people who put through the legislation back in 1996 for all its faults. And one thing that contributed to that was a document called the Transgender Report, which has got Norrie's drawing on the front cover. And anyway, what Darby is talking about is that if you compare the data in that report, the levels of assault, sexual assault, levels of unemployment, casual work, nothing much has improved in 25 years. I think the number of trans people in full-time work was something like 30% in the recent 2018 Positive Life report. But I was going to say something else too. My own life, I owe a great deal to Roberta Perkins, and I have a couple of documents here that I'm going to pass on to the community. This is a fabulous piece of ethnography done by Roberta back in the early 1980s in King's Cross. It's called The Drag Queens Scene. Transsexuals in King's Cross Tell Their Own Story. And I met Roberta, and Roberta actually helped me come out. And I also learned something about the discipline of sociology as a result, and it enabled me to do research that contributed to transgender people's better lives. And I guess I'm putting in a kind of plug for research here again today and saying that, if you're thinking of going into it, it's so important, it can really make a difference. But I wrote a couple of notes, and I just wanted to also pay tribute to and honour Adi Griffin and Nadine Stranson, who were comrades and sisters of me when we put the legislation through a long time ago, and I hadn't seen them for years. So thanks very much. It was an honour to know both of you. But I had this idea that the panel might kind of think about some ideas here. So I've got the idea that research does matter. The ideas that came to my head were these, that we need not simply legal justice, but we need material justice. And that involves things like this: Indigenous, migrant, working class, TGD people, people with disabilities. That group of people are particularly at risk. And the question I'm raising here is, what are our priorities and where do we put our energy in terms of pushing politicians for better policy that's going to benefit people who are in greatest need? So extra funding for specialised services in those areas, I think, and prisons we talked about as well, aged care we talked about, I won't go there. We need decriminalisation of sex work everywhere in Australia, which Roberta famously fought for in New South Wales. Access to transsexual medicine provided by the public sector, Otherwise you have a situation where those who have surgery are the beneficiaries of class inequality. The other issues, and look, I reckon that's something that we could do because we're a small group, the costs would be minimal compared overall. The other things that came to mind are involvement in unions. I've been following the NTEU as the National Tertiary Education Union that I'm still a member of, even though I'm still not working at a university. And I want to commend the work of young Danny Cotton, who has run a campaign in the NTEU for transition leave, and she's won it. And it's the sort of thing that could be carried over into other industries as well. So becoming involved in unions is a really important thing. I think the other thing I'm going to bring up is a really complex issue, and I don't know enough about it. Other people might know a lot more than I, but I think it's going to become an issue. I noticed in the Saturday papers the issue of trans women participating in women's sport is going to be a complex and difficult issue to deal with. And I think what I wanted to say here is, you may disagree with what I say violently, but I think we've had recently some favourable but limited shifts in public opinion in support of us. And we don't want to lose that, although the Murdoch press routinely runs demonising articles attacking us. So what I'm saying here is, I can only say this for my part. Most of my friends are women. A lot of my supporters are women. They've supported me through so much that's happened to me, and I think feminist allies are essential. The way that we engage in debate about women's participation in sport, the way we engage in that debate is more important than what we say. Now, I guess from my perspective, okay, I take a particular view of this. I think scientific evidence is never entirely neutral, but scientific evidence, I think in some cases, means that we've got issues with trans people who, like Leah Thomas, for example, that's been a huge controversy in America. So I'm not saying we back down on this one, but I'm saying we should share women's concerns about economic injustice, about violence and poverty, older women in poverty in this society as well. And I think the point is this: we must build alliances. We are a small group. We cannot retreat to an essentialist position, in my view, in terms of biology. The Indigenous and people with disabilities in our communities are terribly important. We look after them. And I think that basically we have to be very careful with our arguments regarding these issues of trans women in women's sport. It's the other side of the coin for trans men altogether, of course. They won't even get a go. But I guess what I'm saying here is, in sum, we need to have our priorities clear, we need to join with and make allies, and we need to make claims on the state for all of these things. It's about collective struggle. We might have a new government in Canberra, and let's hope in New South Wales shortly. I hope some of you are engaged in fighting for some of these things and improving our lives. And once again, thank you so much for the panel. It was very moving hearing all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess. Thank you. Thank you, Jess. And Jess, as you've brought up an enormous amount of issues as well, and the sport one is a big one. And I will say, in fact, they don't see trans men as a threat. That's because they see the woman. And I find it really interesting, as that question comes in all the time in education. And I love, like, the junior world champion wrestler is a trans man. Yeah, and nobody mentions, you know. It's really interesting, and the imbalance of how that's reported.
One more thing, Darby. I wanted to mention an unsung hero of the Transgender Lobby Coalition. There was a trans man who came with us and spoke to the politicians. There was a trans man who came with us and spoke to the politicians with Norrie and I and Adi and Nadine, and that was Kelby Evans. And I don't know what happened to Kelby, but he was a very important part of our campaign in showing politicians that, yes, there were trans men as well as trans women. So I'm just paying tribute to Kelby Evans as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess. And I think, yeah, people still get in shock that there's trans men. Oh, I'm here. Any other question? Anyone want to make any comments? Joe?
Yeah, well, I'm still an unashamed feminist. I think I was held back in my growth by second-wave feminism, which was very binary and oppositional, and some of that did my head in. But I think we cannot, as a trans community, we will not move forward unless we build alliances. That's the secret of any movement of change, and certainly in the feminist world. And so intersectional feminism is absolutely vital. And some people won't agree with us, but we work with everyone else. And the big issues are not just to do with the things that, and that was like the religious discrimination debate. It wasn't about religion, it was about attacking a range of people. Trans people became quite central, but there were people with disability, a whole range of different people would be affected by that. So it's building that and a better vision for the world. And my hope is, I think the current government, federal government's run out of steam. I think it's time for a different climate in that, where it's less oppositional and maybe we get beyond the culture wars. But the reality is that there are powerful forces who have the money and the power in the world, and they are using those to distract us. So if we get into foolish arguments with one another, we're playing their game, and that's what they seek to do, to divide us and divide us from other people who could have a better life if we work together.
Well said, very well said. We cannot be divided. We really have to work together and understand when things are being used to politicise. And I think that's the tragedy around some of the feminism. It's, you know, being used and focused by Murdoch Press and others to divide. We've got to work through that, absolutely. Queer feminism.
Yeah, look,
all different. Inclusive feminism. The rest is not. That's
exactly.
it. You know?
Look, I just wanted to say something on feminism. I mean, I was really never into feminism myself. I just was so focused on being trans, and you know, it seemed like hard work to get involved with feminism. So I just went in one row, and sort of like my work at SWAP has brought me into the feminist world, though, however, and and I was invited. I was sharing this with Joe in the break. I was invited to my first talk and presentation about being trans and a sex worker. And like I said, I'd never really delved in that area, and so I thought it was a great opportunity, and I was over the moon. And then a couple of my girlfriends started texting me a day before I go and do my presentation at Sydney University, and they start firing all these questions at me. Watch out for the feminists, sister, they're out to get us, and so I went in there with a bloody shield and dagger, right? And but I did not share the stage on my own. I was there with other sex workers, and it was amazing. Like there were over 100 women in this auditorium, and 4 of us sitting up on the stage like how we are today. The minute I stepped on that stage and was amongst my people, like there were other workers up on the stage, I felt so much more comfortable. But throughout that whole presentation, we never copped any flack. There was one woman that had an issue with pornography. And, sex workers do too, because a lot of guys think that that's how it should be done. And we just tell them, this is not a bloody porn show. This is real life. But, that's when I started to see, like, okay, yeah, it was nothing like what my girlfriends was talking about. And over the years, being in feminist spaces, that's what I've experienced. I've also experienced the hard end of it as well, being, asked to leave a meeting, because of that. But that's only the one episode, and I should be grateful for that, because the rest of my journey within feminism is changing. But it's also changing because it's a different generation. Okay, I noticed that the women that were at the university, they were all young feminists, and it's a lot of but you know what, you get that in all groups. Like you've got in our own group in the trans scene, not the older generation that they're set in their ways and this is how it should be and it won't be any other way. Well, it's like that all over. So that was my little feminist input.
And I think, again, the Murdoch press and politics, look, feminism is a huge umbrella term like gender diversity. And there's a range of thoughts and schools of feminism, and most are amazing. And the media is focusing on divisive stuff as well, and I think, Josephine, if I'm correct, let's not focus on that. Let's shroud ourselves together and focus on the warmth feminism, the supportive stuff, because we can't take on those struggles. I think they're just spurted out tirelessly by the media, and hopefully it will change one day, but we still have a long way to go. Yeah, why we're still seen as titillating, and there's all that stuff in the media about us, and it's really important, I think, that you challenge that as allies, that you write to where you see demeaning and uninformed opinions on us, ill-educated, that we start writing to ministers. That last debate, this Religious Freedoms Bill, we talk about the generational stress today of what being brought up perhaps when homosexuality was illegal, when it was illegal to that. I can't imagine, because as a young person there was no such thing as trans people in the press, how we see it today, how it must be like sitting in a school, not knowing, hearing about toilet debate, and the stuff that's happening in the US. That impacts our kids here. It impacts those parents here. And I can't for the life of me imagine that stress of a 4-year-old who's got this support, who can come out and then is carrying this fucking anxiety and fear beyond what any child should experience. That adults can get away with that. That is really important, that we start writing and saying, stop acting like fucking idiots. Really. Yeah.
I was just going to make the comment, though, that we can be, even as a transgender diverse community, as a sexually diverse community, we can be our own worst enemies. We can be our own worst enemies by being so pedantic about identification. And I think one of the issues, and I've heard this from so many allies in my relatively short journey, that they are fearful of entering into a conversation about gender and sexual diversity because they don't want to get the letters in the wrong order. Is it GLB, LG? I'm so sorry, I don't want to offend you. And it's like, who cares? Yes, what we do as human beings is we choose a category to help us identify ourselves. And when you explain to people that the LGBTIQA S plus whatever, there's at least another 84 or 86 more letters, whatever you choose, and that not everybody just chooses one. How are these people ever going to understand and feel comfortable to enter in to a conversation comfortably and respectfully with us if they're fearful they're going to step on a landmine? Well, the media is, but I know of many people in the gender and sexually diverse community, as well as the sexually diverse community, that they are very pedantic. I am this, and don't call me that. Well, okay, everybody has a right to stand firmly on how they identify. But one of the things I found most powerful in my own journey of education is explaining to people that we are only talking about difference, not right or wrong. We're talking about difference. Because when we find a truth for ourselves, that truth is made up of so many different factors that we group together to say, this is how but this is an individual understanding, I'm not saying generally, this is how we as individuals understand. That's a human thing, we categorise. Come on. Yeah? I understand that can be really, really wearing. It wears you down. It wears you down to the point where you don't feel that you're visible. Indeed.
I'm going to say laziness too, and I think particularly for gender fluid people and gender non-binary, it's that constantly, please use this. And it's actually about, this is how I want to be referred to, this is who I am, just respect it. And we might use different terms as trans people and gender diverse, but we must respect this big array of diversity. And language is exciting and it's hard, and we can go, oh, okay, I'll struggle a bit, but I'll practice. And I think to actually just say, no, my word is right and your word is not right, it's about all the words are right. Tranny, transgender, gender fluid, gender non-conforming, let's throw them all out there. But it's about respecting everybody's identity. And it becomes so difficult. That's what's interesting out there. It becomes, we all learn as a society when a woman is married and her name changed to Mrs. And everybody does that, and a lot of people change their last name and they don't blink. To give up your entire last name and have everybody, and then to say, well, now call me this, and people go, I can't do that, I can't do that, I can't do that, yeah. So there's all these excuses and stuff, but yeah, I think language is important and respect around it is important.
But this, just to round out my point, is to say to people, it is just different. It's not right or wrong. Yes, that's your truth, but your truth and my truth are different, and I need to respect your truth as I would hope you would you would respect mine. Our truths are different because of our experiences. Our experiences aren't things we necessarily choose. I understand, absolutely. Yeah,
I agree.
Absolutely, yes, Google it.
And I think as we get older, this is the thing. I mean, as I said it earlier, I find, why do I have to be the one educating all the fucking time? It is so tiring. I got a phone call the other day from a dear friend, and it was about the stuff in sport, and he's so straight it's not funny, but he loves me, he's a great guy. I don't know, he's a great ally, but he loves me. He goes, oh, Darby, I need to know what you think. And I'm like, oh, fuck. really? And he's like, yeah, I've got to talk to my friends, I'll have to know. And listen, I'm just pushing it here, and I didn't want to be pushed, you know? It's that stuff, and I know he's doing the right thing, but mate, go look it up on Google or something. I don't know. Go, here's a trans site, here are the answers. Gender, I don't know. But yes, it gets extremely tiring, I think. And some of us, I mean, I struggle with the word resilience because we're all meant to have it 24 hours a fucking day. Hi, I'm Mr. Resilient. And I go, so how do we get there? How do we get to be resilient?
Excuse me, darling, can I add something to the point here? Look, I think both speakers make very good points.
Add something when you're mic'd up. Wait a second.
sorry.
In comes the microphone. Here it is.
I think both speakers make very good points. I've been enraged at times when I know that someone's deliberately having a go at me. You know, that they'll call me he or yes sir, and I'll think, oh, you must be some kind of idiot calling me that. That's how you feel like saying that. But I don't think we're really at cross purposes, because there was a wonderful broadcast that I heard the other day. I think it might be a friend of mine here who put me onto it, by Susan Stryker, the academic from Arizona of University of California, Arizona actually it is. And she actually said that to be trans is a gift. And I think this might sound very soppy to you, but I guess what I'm saying, connecting here, is we can develop an ethos of generosity, of loving and caring at the same time as we're educating these people. We can't help but educate them. I have a friend who lived around the corner the other day who said to me, look, I need to ask you, I just don't know what transgender means. So there's a really basic misunderstandings or basic ignorance across society. This is a university-educated professor of political science who asked me this question, right? So I just want to say that I think we can work with both. We can be generous, and we can also say, well, I also have a sense of myself that I'm not going to trash, and I'm going to be direct about saying, you know, what I'm going to. Well, excuse me, my title is as follows. Please call me that. That's the way I've tended to deal with it, very directly and very politely. It doesn't always work, I have to say.
All right, okay. We are, if anyone else has a burning question, we're probably winding up in a minute or two. Beautiful. We'll get, Don, all right, beautiful.
I'll make it quick. Okay, and as perhaps the oldest person here, I'm not sure, but as perhaps the oldest person here, I live in a retirement village. I'm the first transgender person ever to be in the village. I thoroughly enjoy the time with the lady members of the village. They're wonderfully accepting, but they do need educating. I enjoy most aspects of trying to make them understand, but I don't push it. I try not to push it too hard. Obviously, I'm a biased party. The only time I was a little unsettled when one of them chose to press my breast. I wasn't really too upset. She didn't mean any harm, but I like to think that after me involved with the activities in the village and mixing them, and particularly it's the women, that I'm helping educate them because they do ask questions. They don't understand, and in fact, to be fair, I don't fully understand why I am the way I am anyway. But I hope that by mixing with people, particularly at the age I'm talking about, it can be beneficial in helping understanding. Thank you.
Hello. I just wanted to just sort of address what you said, sort of how can we be resilient. So if I'm trying not to take up too much time. So I came out in 2020 and I was born in 1960, and I came out, I occupy 3 to 4 letters of the rainbow, so I came out in all of them: bisexual, asexual, transgender. I also came out a few years ago as Indigenous, which I didn't know. I'm a transplant recipient. I was a heroin IV drug user in the 1980s. I suffered from extreme mental illness, depression. My family has very heavy intergenerational issues, especially my mother had very heavy issues. I grew up in a very strict Catholic family. Technically, I probably came out in 1973 when I went to my sister's all-girl Catholic school as her cousin, Joanne. And my mother used to call me Joanne when I was a child, so she must have known something. But I could never join the dots that I was trans. So I want to say this, and it's really, really simple. When I came out in 2020, excuse me for swearing, but I am so fucking happy. Every day is a fucking gift. I am so full of pride and joy that I'm a transgender woman, and all the trans people in the world, we are a global network. I use social media. I know we're all conflicted. I don't agree with all the commercialisation of Mardi Gras. I still haven't been to Mardi Gras. I actually got kicked out because I fought with the choreographer at Trans Pride Australia, but let's not go there. And like people like Colleen sitting here today, Norrie, these incredible pioneers, when I came out, it's all there for me. ACON, Trans Hub, everything. You know, I get the best treatment. I'm a disability pensioner. It's one of the best places in the world to be transgender, I think, Australia right now. It is absolutely fantastic. You know, Teddy Cook is a saint, what he has done for us. And I just think pride, real pride, you know, not pride sponsored by American Express, buying our identities. I mean real pride. Feel it in your heart. Feel it in your heart. Like every day I wake up and I go, I can't believe this. I was so miserable in my dead name, pretending to be cis het male, with these ridiculous, you know, gender policing and hating myself and feeling suicidal and knowing why and not knowing why. You know, spending $120 an hour to see a therapist in the 1990s and not even telling them that my first boyfriend was when I was 15, not even telling them I secretly fucked men, not even telling them that I just wished I was a woman. I loved dressing as a woman. You know, I'm so proud. Look at me. I'm wearing beautiful Alice McCall clothes and I've got makeup on and my hair and it's just beautiful. It's just incredible. So, you know, there's so much infighting and conflict, and there are forces out there. You know, all these wannabe Janice Raymonds, they're still out to get us. They've been out to get us since the 70s. Fuck them. You know? We are here. We've always been here. You know, Teddy says that. We are here. We've always been here, and we'll always will be. So it's real pride you feel in your heart. That's the resilience. That's what saves me every fucking day. Yes. Sorry, rant over.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Is there anything anybody wants to say? I think we have to wind it up now. Is that correct? Is it? Yeah, I think.
We could probably open it up to the room.
Yep, open up the room.
And if anyone wanted to make a comment or, yeah, there we go.
Just further to Donna's input, years ago, the whole idea behind transitioning was when you went to the psychiatrists and the doctors and that, there was always an air of expectation that you were eventually going to assimilate, that you were going to leave the gay scene, that you were going to, you know, get a straight job and go forth and do all of that. And a lot did and a lot didn't, but going out into the community, it's sort of like an outreach work, because there's so many people out there who don't seek attention for it, who don't, you know, want the notoriety of being trans because they're not ready for that stage. But it's actually, the onus was placed on all of us to go out and spread the word and be good allies. And this is 35 years ago, you know. So I think if we can take a bit of that from our history and try to implement it these days, because we've got the strength, we've got the confidence, we've still got a long way to go, but why not go out and show not only members of our community, but members of mainstream community that we're okay, you know, that we're just as reliable, we're just as dependable and strong and capable people, and, you know, show that we are, rather than just, when you go to pronouns, like you were saying, there's so many of them, people get clouded over by what letters mean what and that sort of thing. So I think if we can draw on that, our past of going out a bit more and sharing it in a non-aggressive way or a non-offended way, I think that would have a lot of weight. Thank you. Thank you.
Was there any other comments anyone wanted to make? I've got one question just for the panel. I'm curious if you have one thing that's prominent or concerning about getting older in a transgender, diverse, non-binary experience. If there's one thing that sort of stands out that needs to be addressed more.
Can you just repeat that? Dying is one of the problems.
That one we can't avoid, none of us. Nori, you want to pick?
Nursing home. I can't remember why I started on this tack now, I'm sorry. But the question is about aging, the thing that worries. There's no question that for, I think, well, many transgender people, the lady mentioned joy. Since I've come out, experience joy every day. But I've left it very late, and so I mourn in a way that I haven't got much time to have that joy. So it's a mixed answer, I'm sorry, a bit confused, but thank you.
When I was thinking about ageing and being trans, I thought, well, anyone that lives long enough will age and be trans. Doctor Who, after 2,000 years, changed sex. Orlando's another one. But yeah, growing old is something that happens if you're fortunate enough. And I'm aware, as a person of white privilege, one of the reasons I am still alive long enough to be aging is white privilege. My Aboriginal peers, the people I knew when I was young that didn't have the same privilege, they're not around, most of them. So hooray to be aging and wrinkling and getting creaky and knowing what the weather is from how your joints are acting. It's still great because you get to enjoy this life. It's annoying, though, that we're always seem to be fighting the same battles. Like we decriminalised homosexuality way back when. We did the trans legislation in '96. And then in 2017, we had the marriage equality debate. And that traumatised a lot of young kids. Because before then, there was no question that if you're queer, of course you're accepted. But suddenly it became a question. And now we've got our prospective Prime Minister, touch wood, got asked if men could have babies by the Daily Telegraph. So, of course, he said no. Now, we'll correct him about that after the election. I'm letting it slide for the time being.
I guess the thing for me is the concern of institutional care. You know, it's still a very, very long way off from being trans-inclusive, because there's insufficient education, there's insufficient resources, and aged care, let's face it, is a mess as it stands, and that's without the issue of gender identity. You know, and so, as Darby mentioned earlier, you know, he alluded to the use of psychotropic drugs to essentially keep the residents asleep so that staff can get on and manage some of it because they're understaffed. So, you know, that's for people who they should actually have some knowledge and understanding of, let alone somebody who is a complete mystery to them. And therefore, it would be too hard. They wouldn't have time. So that would be my concern about ageing.
Yeah, I think I'd add to that about a good death. I think the wisdom traditions about good life at their best and helping people to live well. And and truthfully and authentically and joyfully, which is what's been said, and how to cope with suffering, which faces us all in different ways and as we get older. And that's one of the really devastating things about betrayal of some of the parts of the wisdom traditions, Christian and others, that they have betrayed what could be valuable to people at various ages, including older people, especially queer people now, and the suspicions and things. But I believe that will change. Well, it is changing, and it will change, and that we can then draw on the best of human wisdom to aid us in that journey, and for us as trans people to widen and enhance that with the gender euphoria, particularly, that has been expressed just now, which you can experience beautifully, as Donna's put it, at any time and in your life. And yeah, so we make the aged care a wonderful, joyful trans space. Would be a wonderful thing to hope for in the future.
Sorry. Yeah, I was thinking ACON recently they launched a project called End of Life, and that's online for people to look at. So maybe people here haven't actually seen it or they're not aware of it, and that would be very inclusive for everybody. You know, I mentioned earlier, I've got, both my parents have, they died, and I had one in aged care for 4 years, and alongside I had my mother in for 13 years, and both of my parents had accidents in aged care. My dad hit his head after he had sepsis, and he died 6 weeks later. They were kicking out the staff that day. They were changing, the lift broke down, so my dad, I told him he just came out, he just survived, we thought he'd died. And then my mother, so Dad hit his head, and he had been kicked in aged care in the leg, and all his leg opened up because they had some man there who really hated men. And when I asked the aged care people, why did my dad get kicked? They said, oh, we knew nothing about it. So I actually rang Sutherland Hospital and found the people that brought the man to my dad's aged care. I found the doctor that had referred him, and they both told me that he had problems with other men. My dad just happened to be sitting opposite him having afternoon or morning tea and got kicked. My mother tripped over 2 walkers in her aged care. She broke her hip 6 weeks after Dad died. Then she fell and broke her arm in another aged care. And I had to say to them, I'm not a litigious person, but if my mother isn't moved closer to where the nurses are and people can actually see her every day as they go by, then if anything more happens to her, I may have to look at things differently. Because she was right at the end of a corridor, and I'd just left her that afternoon, and they didn't discover her for 3.5 hours later on the floor. So it's trans, gay, LGBT, and I think we're all the same, and I think that's what the good thing will be in the future. If you're proud to be whatever you are, I'm a non-binary person, I'm very happy to say that now, but I think in the future we just have to accept that we just fit in everywhere, because the majority of the world is straight, and the majority of my friends are straight, and they're the best people in the world anyway. And I've got a gay son, a very straight daughter, and I've got a question mark on my grandchild.
Thanks, Ros. Just to highlight what Ros was saying, ACON launched just a couple of weeks ago, Taking Control, Palliative Care and End-of-Life Decision Making. It's a toolkit that sits on the ACON website. And it's support for us to have those sort of conversations ongoing.
Russ, does ACON have the will kits as well? Is that?
We've got the bequest kit on the website as well, on the palliative care. What was your question, sorry?
About will. I thought ACON did wills.
I think we are. Are we still doing a collaboration with
If people do
making
need
wills?
to get wills done.
Yeah.
It was an old project, maybe it's gone, sorry.
Yeah.
Gender Centre was doing that, they had some lawyers come out.
Okay, so
But
if
that-
you need, I mean, that stuff is important as well, you know, so.
And look, I do like what Joe said, and Karen as well, about making our lives good right to the end. You know, like care and respect and acknowledgement and just seeing everyone for who they are right to the end. That's why we don't want to fade away in those last sort of 5 or 10 years.
So I just wanted to throw back questions that I put to the panel before, which were, I enumerated a whole series of issues, and there are issues that other people have raised here. So my question to you is, are there priorities? If we were going to meet politicians, for example, and ask for funding for things or assistance of some kind, what do we prioritise, if anything, in your view? That's for the panel.
Housing, public housing. Housing is a major issue in this country. The government used to, and the councils used to have fund public housing for working people as well. Now they've slashed the funding, so it's only for the most desperate, the people with the most co-issues. So you end up with the most vulnerable people bundled up together. Now, sometimes they don't look after their houses, and then the government go, oh, we need to knock down these places and build some private flats so we make money out of it. So public housing is very important. And the other thing I'll say is, I hope I get old enough to end up in a nursing home, and I want there to be nurses in the nursing home around the clock.
Nicely said.
Obviously, it's not a trans issue, it's an issue for everybody. And, oh, but how do we fund it? Well, we found the money to give $5.5 billion to the French for submarines we're not getting. So the question of how we fund necessary services, what a slap in the face that is.
But can
I think, Jesse, I think too, your question, the point you raised rather about public sector medical care, I think that's another hot potato that needs to be raised front and centre to our governments.
Can I just make a point? As somebody who's terrified of finishing up in a nursing home. I've heard a lot of things about nursing home. I also think I know that the staffing ratios in the private funded nursing homes, are very limited. They certainly were in situations that helped them move the virus from home to home, and yet we're seeing the owners of those nursing homes making huge profits. And I'm sorry, I'm bringing politics into this, but I really personally feel, and perhaps it's because I originate from the northeast of England, which had the hunger marches in the 30s, before my time, I should say. I would rather see far more nursing homes which are run by the public sector, or certainly more controlled by the public sector. And it's a real worry to, I think, many of us, once we get close to where it could happen to us, that we will be mistreated. And being transgender, you're particularly worried about that, because there's no doubt there's still many people around who like to mistreat people like ourselves. So I would like to see more controls of the private sector nursing homes, and I'd like to see perhaps more money going to public nursing homes, but with appropriate checking. Thank you.
I'm just going to jump in here as well. Thank you, Donna. You know, for me, I guess it's about having stable and secure housing, and it's something that I'm quite passionate about, coming from the housing field, and which leads me on to, I'm a member of the only transgender housing co-op in New South Wales and around the world, actually, and we formed that many, many years ago. So one of the reasons why we formed that was because we noticed that as we age, we kind of like disappear into the never never. And we find ourselves isolated, as Donna was talking about. And so a few sisters and I got together, and with the help of a friend who's in housing co-op, who mentioned, you know, oh my God, you know, I'm seeing a lot of sisters come in to see you about housing. And I said, yeah. And so he said, you know, had you ever thought about starting up a trans housing co-op? And I said, oh my God, I don't even know what you're talking about, you know. But, you know, once he finally spoke to me about it, and then another sister and I got together, and we thought, you know, what a fantastic idea, because we see a lot of the, you know, trans community disappear once we start aging. They go out wherever, I don't know where, and a lot of our community members who are a lot older and mature, and so yeah, I think for me, it's about having stable and secure housing.
I was going to say, with housing, I agree with housing, but I would come back to the medical thing. I think it's the big ticket issue in the trans community. It's so, as people said, if you got associated with class privilege money and such like, and it ties into a whole set of discourses and narratives about the body, who controls your body, who's got entitlement for that. And we've got a rollback in America about abortion, and these things will come back. So it's a feminist issue. I think a lot of other things. If you go for the big issues, then the other bits fit in, like pronouns and everything else. When you push for, and when you really ask for what you really want, which is dignity for everyone, which includes basic housing, right to people, who controls them and such like, and that goes to the heart of a lot of the narratives that are floating around at the moment.
Thanks, Joe. And I, in answer to that question, feel everything everybody has said, housing and health. I don't want to face humility when I'm old. I don't want to have my body laughed at in an institution, and I want to be well housed and well looked after, and I want to see myself as well. So I don't just want to be the lone tranny in the bloody home. I don't want that. I would love to be in an ideal space where it was a reflection of the world I've lived in when I'm younger, which is I am in a queer society, and I don't want to be thrown out into some heteronormative aged care. And I know, I'm very blessed with my partner, and I know that they will look after me, but that may not be. I can't rely on a partner as well. And I think, Jess, that goes, we can't get any of this until we fucking get money and hassle politicians and create great change. To get this, we are reliant on a government for funding, or some really rich trans people, and I'm not sure there's that many of us. So I don't know if Bill Gates is going to look after us, but I think it's, after this election, we
Lukowskis.
Yeah, but we need to hassle after this next election like nothing else as well. I mean, to get all of these things, because we can't get these on our own. So that's the fear, that it won't happen in our lifetime. Because for all our iblings, nibblings, siblings and gibblings that have come before us and have not had that, for all of those went before, we need to keep positive, keep together, keep using the resources that are out there like ACON, keep feeding back and keep growing together and grow with our friends. And so I want to thank ACON for making this able. And I wonder if people want to, people from community, there's been talk about leaving some emails, and maybe we can connect afterwards. So maybe we can put a list, people that want to write their emails up, and maybe we can get in contact afterwards. Does that sound okay with people? I don't want to, yeah.
Yeah, look, I think if you do feel like connecting, by all means, I think connect individually and share emails. And we're almost to the end, so look, I wanted to just take a chance to give a very, very special thanks to, unless someone wants to say something else before I close. Oh, there we go. I love one last comment. Yes, absolutely.
Look, it's been really, really nice joining you all this afternoon. And one thing about ageing is that you get to see a level of continuity in your life, or in a civilization, or call it what you will. So now sitting here and discussing aged care, we're discussing, medical issues, political issues, funding, education for children and communities, and the whole. It's almost like now we've been playing catch up for so long that now our dialogue is almost the same as mainstream. I'm not comparing it to that, but I'm just saying we're dealing with the issues, the real issues, whereas 40 years ago it was just about getting hormones and what doctor could see us and what club we could go into and what night we could dress up, all that sort of. Now it's down to the nuts and bolts of looking after you when you can't. So to see that level of continuity come out, I'm really, really pleased. And I just think for the younger generation, for them to catch wind of this, it can only help our cause. That's all. Thank you.
Well, that sounds like a good segue now to thank the panel and Darby. Thank you, Joe, and Karen, and Chantel, and Norrie, and Darby. Exceptional just to sit in the room this afternoon and have you be so open and share your stories. I hope we have something to take away from this afternoon. I hope it's the first time we do this too. I hope we have lots more conversations with our older community, so we can really sort of tease out kind of what we need to do and who we need to sort of speak to politically. So I think a round of applause to start with. And one thing we're going to do is I'd like to give a plant to all of the panel. Do you have a particular colour you like, or is it random? Can it just be the lovely Maria? Might give those out. And we're going to raffle all of the rest of them. So has everyone got a raffle ticket? Did everyone get a raffle ticket? Yeah? And I think Colleen's going to do the... Have we all got our raffle ticket? Pull them out, because we've got all the plants that you see around. You can choose... 15, number 15. Do we have a 15? 15? Maybe we don't have a, oh, 15, okay, there we go, yeah. So you can choose whatever plant you want, whatever colour. 12? 12? So is this one nice? 18? There we go. Yeah. So you can grab one too, wherever if you want a white or a pink or red or... Which one would you like? The white one, okay. So I think we've got, how many have we got left? 1, 2, 3, 4? 7? There we go. And I think we've still got, so we've got this one, haven't we? 3. So we've got 3 more numbers to pull out. 3? There we go. Yeah. Either one, the red one, yeah. 14, yeah. There we go. Oh, sorry. And lucky last? 9. And Ros has just reminded me also, in May, we've got 2 events coming up. We've got one to explore the palliative care and end-of-life toolkit more in a face-to-face situation, which is exciting to be able to do this more. And we're also doing one about digital technology and digital awareness, and they're both in May. So keep an eye out for those. You're probably all on the email list, so you'll probably get some reminder. But I think that's about... Oh, and there's lots of food, so please grab a takeaway and just don't be shy. Just grab that food and stuff it in your bag and get out. Yeah, beautiful. And also, if anyone would like to help with the pull down, I'd be very appreciative. I think that's all, Joel. Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone.